I'm going to go ahead and call us to order and declare that we have a quorum present of 7 members. Item C, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to boundary adjustment recommendations. Before we get started, I want to kind of set the stage a little bit. I know most of the people here probably know what we're doing. And one thing I would say is that this is, for us, the start of our process. And in an earlier meeting, I likened it to the making of sausage. And so I would say that what you'll see is work that previously was done by a committee, usually in the old boardroom, really in evening sessions that were not public meetings. Well, under our new process, we're now doing it here by the board out in the public. So bear with us. One thing I would encourage you to do is relax a little bit because you will probably hear questions that are asked, and those questions do not necessarily mean that that is the way someone is pushing the discussion. It's just a question. So also for all of us, let's try to relax a little bit, and as we go through it, understand that this is the start of the process for us. And as we're pushing and pulling on lines and issues, let's keep that in mind. Okay, with that, Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I'd like to begin our discussion this afternoon with going over some of the data that was asked for by members of the board at our very first boundary adjustment workshop back last Wednesday on the 28th. So we've got 4 things that we would like to share with you that were asked for. We also want to, we've had our transportation department work on some information as well. So we want to share that as far as various options and what that could mean for numbers of routes and additional buses and things like that. So we'd like to share that as well, and also respond to a couple of other issues that have come up or questions there. We've got some data in there as well. So I'd like for Mr. Martindale, our Deputy Superintendent, to take us through that. We'll be showing it up on the screens. Here you have a hard copy in front of you. All of this will be posted on the website at the conclusion of this afternoon's board meeting, so the public will be able to see all this as well. So I'd like for Mike to take us through that and then lead into whatever conversation the board is pleased to have. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Dr. Ely, board members. In our presentation, we're trying to, well, not trying, we want to refer back and address some of the questions from our prior meeting and some of the data that was requested from board members. We also have some other pieces in there that some interesting data points just to try to share with the group as well to begin the conversation. The way I organized this particular presentation is as such. We'll go through the 4 options that we shared, in the beginning with the board. Of those options, for each one of them, as we go through them, we share the number of students by neighborhood moving between the 2 high schools. I think that's something Dr. Weston had inquired about previously. We'll also take that particular option and overlay our existing middle school boundaries. Mr. Harris had inquired about that. Also sat and spent some time with our transportation folks, just to, with me being responsible for budget and implications from that standpoint and transportation cost and those types of things. I was curious to visit with them to see exactly what that might translate as far as the transportation side and added routes or not to what we currently have in place. We'll talk a little bit about transportation ride times, not specific minutes, but kind of define that as to how we define what ride times are in the transportation department and try to project kind of what we think that will look like with the particular options. The map of the geographic areas that changed previously, I believe Ms. Olin had inquired about that. Also, the number of students projected for Margraves and other growth areas in consolidated zone, and how those particular number of high school students come aboard through the projections used by Templeton Demographics each year in the out years. And then also just the current number of student transfers we have between our two high schools at this point in time, just as a reference. Okay, so that's kind of how I organized the presentation today. So start with option one. You're familiar with the particular map. It's different than what I showed before, simply using Templeton's. It has a few street names and those types of things on it. It just helps you to orient yourself. If you remember in this particular map, an adjustment up north for College Station High School, and also adjustments on the southeastern and southwestern parts of the district with Indian Lakes, and then over toward Welborn Road. If I can draw your attention to the chart that's embedded there in the map, this is option one, if you recall. In this particular option, this is for 2019 numbers projected out for that particular year. The number of students that would be moving to College Station High School associated with this change up north would be 100 students. Okay? The sum of...
So can I clarify, because we heard some comments, I think, and we've seen some different things in letters we have received. So when we say 100 is not the number of kids that are currently in high school in that area. It is the number of kids, students that are currently in 8th, 7th, 6th, and 5th grade plus growth. So exactly where do we get that 100 number from, I guess is my question.
Go ahead.
So it's not current kids right now. It's projected 9th through 12th graders in 2019. So we take each one of those planning areas and aggregate the projections, whether they're projected to grow, projected to stay the same, projected to decline, aggregate them all together, and that's the projected number for 2019 for all of these numbers.
Okay, so 100 would be the number of freshmen we would have, or it would be the number of 9 through 12 starting in 2019.
Projected number of 9th through 12th graders in 2019.
We're good. I got you. Thank you.
But in that formula, that's basing it on kids. I think Dr. Wesson's asking, those numbers are based on the amount of kids that are in the lower grades now, though, right? And that's somehow based on that formula, right?
Yes, so they do their mathematics, excuse me, for each one of the planning areas to make a projection for each area, and they use the number of units there, the number of parcels in that particular planning area, and they look at the growth that has happened in that planning area. They look at whether there's in that planning area, if there's more added parcels or added development that's planned in there. These obviously are apartment complexes that have been around on Anderson Street for a long time, so there's not projected extra ones, but they take our numbers of kids and do cohort survival projections moving forward.
And I think the reason we're asking for clarification, there's a lot of comments being made or questions saying that, hey, is that how many students are there right now? And that is not the case.
The answer is no, they're not. We can't just go and count all the kids. We didn't give you that number. We gave you, to give apples to apples comparisons, we gave the number of projected kids in 2019. Okay.
And that will, and I'm sorry, I hate to beat the dead horse, but it's 9th through 12th graders in 2019. However, 75% of them, and I know nothing's decided on grandfathering, but based on the proposal, 75% of them can choose to stay where they are currently zoned.
So I'll just say this, grandfathering has not been contemplated in these numbers at all.
Okay.
At some point, I'm sure you will ask us to go back and say, okay, if we grandfather X number of grades, what's a projection of what it would be like upon implementation? And we can go and do that at that time. This is assuming everybody moves.
Okay.
Very good. So 100 students collectively, grades 9 through 12, fall of 2019. For the movement to Consol, If you look, it says Midtown. That will be coming up in future options, obviously. There was no movement in the middle of the district for option 1. For the Nantuckets Indian Lakes area, which is the movement over to Arrington Road, that captures 136 projected students. And the movement on the shift on the southwestern side of the boundaries would capture a projected 195 students. So we'll move through a map like this. Obviously, you see all the option numbers now, but we'll highlight those as we move through each one of those. Included after that particular map for each one is we took this high school option. The color coding is the high school zone, the blue Consol, the green College Station High School, and then bolded out the middle school zones. Okay, so that this is basically the middle school overlay on top of that particular high school option. The splits down in the right-hand corner, that's information we shared with you previously. I just attached those that seem relevant to this particular item. So again, CSMS obviously is the middle, CMS along your eastern side of 6 and Welborn, the western and southwestern portion. This allows you just to get a visual of the middle school overlaid in this particular option with the projected splits for that one. With me? Okay. This is what sent and went with transportation and try to dissect exactly what we would project our implications were with transportation. So the impacted areas, I'm going to walk through each one of those and it'll begin to make sense to you. For the Anderson Street area, this is where we added capacity with College Station High School. There's currently no bus routes in that particular area because of its locale with Consolidated. It's proximity Consolidated High School. So there are no routes that serve that area currently. Based on the density of that particular area and visiting with transportation, we'd anticipate having to add 2 high school, obviously on the high school routes, because we're talking about high school zones at this point in time, 2 high school bus routes to service that area to offer transport those kiddos to College Station High School. Okay, the next column over is, I want to take in consideration, hey, will we anticipate adding routes for this particular location in the future anyway? I wanted to see what my net effect was, if that makes sense. Well, this is a walkable area, so we wouldn't be planning to have added any routes to this location under our current zones, if this makes sense. Is everyone kind of with my logic on this? So then I try to determine the net adds. So for that particular area, we'd anticipate adding 2 additional high school bus routes. My projected cost on those for a bus driver for the school year runs about $14,000, $15,000. The additional 5 or 6 is the fuel and maintenance of the bus. So we anticipate about $20,000 per route that would be added. So two net routes, $20,000 each, $40,000 new cost for Anderson. Is everyone okay?
So that's the annual cost,
That would be annual, correct.
not counting, then we still have the buses, which we have or we would have to.
Say it to
Do we
me.
have to buy buses?
Do we have to buy buses? We would not have to purchase additional buses to take care of this. What it does require is the management of the number of buses we have available on a daily basis for extracurriculars, for field trips, those types of things. So it would require them to utilize some of those buses that we would have set aside for those to incorporate into daily routes. So would we have to go purchase more? No, it'd require us to manage our existing a little more efficiently. We wouldn't have to make it happen. For the Indian Lakes area, currently we have 2 routes that service our 5 through 12. If in this particular option we made that adjustment, we would need to add a high school only route. obviously. Leave the two existing, it'd be two existing 5 through 8s, and add a high school, just a 9 through 12 that would service that area, then transport those students to Consolidated. Okay?
When you add that high school bus, does that make the route time shorter for the middle school and elementary school folks?
I have that in upcoming slide. Mr.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. Let me go ahead. What it does when you pull and go a high school only route, then obviously those students be taken nonstop from pickup in their neighborhood to the high school, as opposed to the bus currently maybe going to Pecan Trail to College Station Middle School or high school or however. So yes, your delivery site is to the high school alone. So that offset in time, because there's not as much stopping and going delivering students at other campuses that route may serve. So it could definitely lead us to a quicker, a lesser ride time, so to
For
speak,
the high school kids, but
for the high
would that
school.
have any effect on the middle school, elementary schools?
The elementaries are service separate route on that. For the intermediate middle schools, it would now, because they're going to College Station Middle School. Something else we have to take into consideration is next year we're opening Welborn. So obviously Pecan Trail and Welborn are right next or very close to one another. So you're going to gain some return time simply based on location of the third middle school coming aboard. Does that help, Quinn? All right.
Thank you.
One more item of clarification. So assume that we did not do anything with rezoning, just assume we didn't do anything. So the added routes for 2019 growth, that is going to, we would be planning on doing those regardless, right?
Correct. We wouldn't, if we did nothing, would not anticipate it needing to add a route to that particular area at this point in time for
On
2019.
the west side, we would.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm still speaking to Indian Lakes. Yes, that's what's denoted on the west side. Okay. So Indian Lakes, and I'm just moving across my chart, added, it's a net 1, and then I calculate the cost for that. So do the same thing for the west side, Mr. Schaefer. 3 currently, so we would basically make those 3 5 through 8 routes, and then 3 high school only routes. So your delivery time, your 5 through 8 times are going to be tremendously impacted, because right now it's Pecan Trail, College Station Middle School, Big Pecan Trail, Welborn at that point in time. And three separate 9 through 12 routes. So those kids would be picked up and they would go straight to Consolidated. There wouldn't be through the intermediate or middle school delivery times. Okay. Do anticipate, regardless of an additional route in that particular area, fall 19 one way or the other. So I count for that in my net. I know I'm going to probably have to add 3 high schools, so my net return is an add of 2. So if you look at option 1, you have this chart for each one of these. 5 high school routes, 5 times 100,000 collective annual cost.
Can I ask one more question on since we're on transportation, just to get it in my head? So, for example, let's take Indian Lakes, for example. So right now we have 2 routes. So the kids on that bus are grades 5 through 12. Is that is that standard throughout the district, or is it just on some of the areas that are?
That one I'm going to have to defer to the experts sitting behind me. I'm not sure.
Rural areas, Mr. Schaefer, yeah. So if you're within the city limits or closer to the city, we separate those grades.
So it'd be 4 through 8 and then 9 through 12. Okay.
Okay. All right. So then we look at 2A and kind of repeat this setup for each one of the particular options. So at 2A, 100 students is the same geographical area, so that makes perfect sense as we look at 9 through 12 number of students in fall of 2019. This time we did add a Midtown area. This is Graham to Eagle, again from 6 over to Fitch. So That would be 194 students. The movement in Nantucket Indian Lakes area over to Arrington remains consistent at 136. And in this particular option, there was no adjustment on the western side of the boundary. So obviously there's a zero move there. There's a middle school overlay for option 2A. Again, the blue is consolidated zone, the green College Station High School, and then the respective splits associated with option 2A. And we shared that previously as well. I just thought it's relative to have it on this slide as an easy reference. Transportation. Several of these, obviously, if the zoning area or the recommended or proposed change relative to the previous option is the same, then you're going to see the same information for that area. Anderson Street obviously stays consistent. There wasn't anything changed between option 1 and option 2A. Same with the Indian Lakes area. The difference in option 2A was the middle of the district, the Midtown. That's a walkable to CSHS currently. That's why you see 0 current routes. We anticipate needing to add one high school only route to service that particular area. There's no anticipated adds for 2019 under the current system again, because that's considered a walkable or bikeable distance. So your net add for Midtown in this particular option 2A is 1. So collectively, 4 routes, cost of $80,000 annually projected. Okay, look at the same type of information for 2B. Again, the number of students, College Station High School, that area remained consistent. Our Midtown area was impacted in this particular option, so that's why you see the number change from 194 to 128 in this particular, in option 2B. Nantucket Indian Lakes, 0, because that's holding with current zone. And West Side, 191, because in option 2B it has the adjustment over down to Welborn Road area. Again, the middle school overlay for option 2B, so you can just kind of see where CSMS, AMCMS, and Welborn are mapped out when you lay it over option 2B. Then we take a look at our projected bus route implications. Again, Anderson Street area, there was no change, so that remains consistent with the other two. Midtown, while we did change the particular area, the results are the same because, again, we're talking about a walkable distance currently. So there are no current routes to that area. We're anticipating a 1 high school route add for a net of 1. The west side, currently 3 routes servicing 5 through 12. In this particular situation, I believe we discussed this to some degree in the first option. We need 3 high school routes standalone, 9 through 12, and turn the 3 existing to 5 to 8. We're anticipating adding 1 just for the growth in that particular area, so the net impact would be a +2. So this is similar to the option 1, a net of a +5 and 100,000.
When we're talking about the busing, you said it's the rural areas. So is it, can you elaborate on that? Are there any other areas that we're currently doing 5 through 12 besides the west?
You're familiar with recently we had that combination. K through 12, we still have that going on for those middle schools.
Okay.
If I may, Castlegate is also in that pool where we have that combination also. Each Creek.
Option 3, the number of students at College Station High School is 68. So there was an adjustment in that particular area. It's down at Southwest Parkway as opposed to 2818. So that's a little smaller area. That's why you see a shift in that number. An adjustment to the Midtown in this particular option is from 2A and 2B. So that number of students projected would be 268. Eight students for the Margraves, that's South Oaks and Whites Creek area in here. And 28, the west side, just because we came a little farther south to Copy Bridge Road. You take that and overlay that, our middle school overlay. And then our transportation projections. Henderson 1, smaller area from 0 current routes again, because that's currently walkable to Consolidated. So you have a +1 that we need to add for the Anderson Street area. Midtown again is a 0 to 2 high school. So it'd have a net return of 2. And the west side, the previous west side, you saw 3 is a much larger area. This is just down the Copy Bridge. So you're talking about a much smaller area with needing an additional high school. So in this particular scenario, you're looking at a net of +4 or 80,000.
Can I ask a question? So on the added routes, so like under Midtown, we have 2 routes that are going to the high school. The logic behind the 2 is trying to get the kids picked up and get them to school in a timely manner, or is it the number of kids?
Common
Number of riders. So if they did make this bus that would hold 500 people, we'd only be doing 1 bus? Just curious, I'm just asking.
Capacity for high school,
No, sir, 268.
sorry, I'm supposed
No.
to come up to the podium so it gets recorded. So typical number of riders for middle school, high school is between 48 and 50. So
fit on a
we,
bus.
we pretty much drop it at that. And when a bus is full, then we add another bus. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Silva, your projections were based on similar ridership patterns that you're seeing in similar neighborhoods. So that's why you made a projection on numbers or percentage of kids from areas riding. Is that correct?
That is very correct. Historical data shows us we've got a whole bunch of area between 2818 Caleb and Graham, and we've got 1 bus taking advantage of transportation to Console.
So it's more capacity than geographic.
Yes, and sometimes we do consider both.
Inserted this just for FYI, for reference, or when transportation is speaking of ride times, those types of things that are how they define ride times. When they speak of ride times, morning ride time, when our transportation department speaks of this, they quantify it by the first student picked up to the last school they drop off. So when they say ride time, they're speaking of the first child picked up in the morning to when they complete their drop-offs at their last respective school. That's how they define it in their system. Afternoon is in essence a flip-flop of that. it's by the first school picked up to the last student dropped off. Okay, you want to clarify that what it's not is the time a student's picked up in the morning to when their particular school starts. Ride time is not the time school ends to when they get home, because the bus may not be sitting at that school the minute school lets out, so to speak. Bus routes designed, and this says to limit student ride time to no more than 1 hour one way, if at all possible. That is kind of their threshold marker that they use.
Okay, and on that start time too, does that even at the upper levels include being there in time for breakfast? Because that's the other question I've been asked.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
They establish that delivery time based on getting kids there in time enough to eat breakfast before the bell rings, is what they shoot for.
And do they have do you have a general time that you think about on that? Like 15 minutes, 10 minutes? I mean, my kids could eat in 5 minutes, so I just,
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. About 15 minutes for the elementaries. We drop off 7:15, 7:20. For the secondaries, we try to aim right before 8 to 8:10. So 5 before 8 to 8:10.
thank you.
Just stay there, Mr. Silva. Ride times. So this is just as we set and process through, and you may have as Quinn kind of asked this question early on, so you could have deducted this projection already. So how would it possibly impact us from that? Routes that service Pecan Trail and Wellborn Middle School will no longer be able to also service high school students. Okay, again, this is Wellborn at this point in time because it would be open and would be utilized as opposed to CSMS. So we would have high school only routes added to the particular situation with this rezoning. The addition of these routes and Wellborn Middle School being in much closer proximity to Pecan Trail than CSMS, this, I mean, makes sense that we anticipate that we would, in essence, improve some of those ride times. Just proximity of Wellborn Middle School and then having high school only routes, because then they would, in essence, be a nonstop. Once they picked up all students, it'd be a nonstop to the high school, because you're basically separating those routes.
Is this based on every one of the plans, every one of the rezoning plans, or is this just based on option 1 or 2 or 3?
I think that's collectively
That's
the message
all of
from
them?
the Southern.
So all of them are positively affected ride time? Any of them affected better?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if one of them lowers the ride time more than the others.
No, no, I couldn't tell you if one would be more productive in lowering the ride time more so than another one.
Thanks.
I think Snowland had inquired about this at our previous meeting. Took current zones and overlaid that with the areas impacted from last time. The clear or transparent areas were the areas that were impacted with the last high school rezoning. So under the options that we're looking at currently, the 4, none of those particular areas would be impacted a second time. The next 2 slides are just some student numbers utilized in Templeton's projections per neighborhood. So we provide that information in the out years to kind of see how many kids were brought aboard in their projections in particular areas throughout the community. This particular one is the Margraves development. The next slide will have a number of different neighborhoods currently in the consolidated zone. So this is more information points for the board.
So these were inquired about at the meeting public forum that we had on Monday. So we went back and looked at the work that Templeton Demographics has done and tried to incorporate all those on there. So these obviously are projections that are being made out to the 27-28 school year and how they've been incorporated. I just remind the board that these are portions of the 350 plus different planning areas. And so each planning area in the entire 102 square mile school district has numbers like these. These are just ones that were inquired about. So we wanted to share that, yes, indeed, these neighborhoods that are in various stages of development have been accounted for by our demographers. And these are the numbers.
So when I look at the printout with the projected school numbers in the zone, this is some of the
Those are a portion of those numbers.
portion of those numbers.
Yes,
It's
sir.
the source data that they use to total to get to this,
Yes, sir.
in addition to the others. I got it. Okay.
So those have always been included in those numbers.
They've always been included. It's just the question was asked whether they were included. I wanted to show the board and the community that, yes, those are an example of the ones that were mentioned the other night.
And this is Templeton's latest data, right?
Yes, this is Templeton's latest data that they've given us, which is as of September of this school year. And it's the same data set we're using for all of this work that we're doing.
Okay, so I haven't ridden out towards Mission Ranch, but there are streets cut for that? They're, I mean, that's 33, that's 33. I just want to know if,
Sorry, Mike. You're about to answer that. There's a portion of streets that are already owner-occupied homes. Great Oaks is a portion of that right there. So we already have kids who are in that neighborhood. So you add in
Okay.
the Great Oaks and
I got
what
you.
just got added just to the north and west of Great Oaks, and then to the east of that is all part of that whole development.
oh, okay.
That's how we treated that.
Okay,
So
thank
yes,
you.
ma'am.
These Mr. Schaefer, are collectively from when Templeton came and presented to us in December as we delved into our annual enrollment update. Transfer is just something to touch on because this was an interesting data point. A couple of different transfer processes. I wanted to touch on each of these and just give you the current counts for the high schools. So non-employee transfers between our two comprehensive high schools. The reasons for these particular transfers, I've listed several of these here. I'm going to recite them to you. They're there for you to read. The non-employee transfers that we have granted this year, we have granted 45, this is the last bullet on this particular slide, 45 non-employee transfers from Consol to CSHS. And then 59 from CSHS to Consol. It's non-employee for a variety of reasons of which I listed here.
That includes Kate transfers. Yes?
Correct.
Okay.
And we also look at employee transfers. There are two particular categories. Those employees who live within the district and have requested to transfer from one high school to the other, and those who live out of the district boundaries and request their student attend particular high school. Out of district transfers. This school year, we have 38 students of employees who live out of the district who attend Consol and 30 at College Station High School. That's for employees that don't currently reside within our district. In district, this year we have 22 students and employees who reside in our district who have transferred to Consol and 29 students of employees who live within CSISD who transferred to CSHS. So then there are the collective totals for each of the high schools.
Let me see if I have it correct. So we have more students transferring, non-employee transfers from CSHS to Consol by a 59 to 45 margin.
Correct.
And total employee transfers is almost a wash of 60 to 59. Did I add that right? No. Or did I?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. And with it being split, whether they were out-of-district transfers or in-district transfers, which way it went.
Mhm.
Okay. I got it. Thank you.
Just our current remaining.
So I think it's worth. I mean, I think it's worth pointing out. I mean, and we see this in the. We saw this in some of the letters. I've heard it from other people. There's this general broad perception that if we stopped this perk amongst CSISD employees, it would lessen the need. Everybody just has this picture in their mind that everybody's transferring to College Station High School, when in reality that's not the case. Because my impression is most employees who choose to transfer their kids are doing it almost always because that's where they work and it will be easier. Now, obviously, it's not. It's a very large generalization, but
And I think convenience plays a tremendous amount into those decisions, individual convenience. Yeah, and
right. No, yeah, no. I mean, I get. Yeah.
I've always found the transfer numbers particularly interesting because they're so close. I mean, they're just pure. I know if you look at them, they're in the grand scheme of looking at enrollment numbers, they are in essence almost a wash.
Okay. Thank you.
That's what is interesting.
Well, and
in
some at
putting
the
this
high school can
information.
include, because I've seen this before too, and I don't know how you account for this, but you have some employees that would do it for the CAPE program as well. I mean, and so are you accounting for them just one time in the employee, do you understand what I'm asking?
We accounted for them once, not twice. And we counted them as employee.
Yeah, because I know of several that have done it strictly for the CAPE program as well, who are employees, so.
These are an annual, they have to be done annually. If an employee it doesn't apply throughout the Corps, they have to renew that on an annual basis.
I think my original reaction was with you, Mr. Martindale, on a wash. If you look at 119 to 104. Again, I'm not saying I'm for this or against it, but the more I thought about it, it really isn't a wash. If you got one school that's at capacity, it's over capacity, and you're putting 104 kids in there. If you didn't do it, let kids come in there, then it isn't a wash.
True, I guess I was relative to the two numbers, comparison to one another.
Mm-hmm.
Again, under the circumstances, that's 60 kids basically that are attending College Station High School that we don't technically. But you're just gonna. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying.
No, I'm not saying I'm for it against it. I'm just saying that if you're at capacity and you didn't do it, it's not a wash.
Right.
And I am not advocating it. I'm just.
You're on your
Yeah,
own.
you want to go up.
It would lessen that overall enrollment by those transfer numbers if it were limited one way or the other, correct?
Right. Right. It wouldn't just be taking it away from them, the Consol kids, so it would be a wash, correct?
But it depends. That's the answer to everything, Mr. Nugent.
Okay.
It would be a wash if you
It
banned it.
limits.
Sound like a lawyer.
If you banned it for everybody, it's not a
Correct.
it's not a wash if you only ban it going.
Well,
one
then you have to
Right.
start digging into the actual why.
Yeah, no,
I mean, just because someone's an employee doesn't mean that's why they're transferring them.
yeah, I got.
The,
I don't want to get in the middle of this. So I mean, this is a wash, and it is what it is. So
right.
there's a reason I'm not near the microphone. Or turned it off.
That's the end of the information I had to share with the board at present. It's a lot of information. We tried to organize it in a manageable format, so.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. I guess I'm open to how we start. One of the things, I think it might be good if we have any kind of general issues or discussions. I mean, for example, one thing I would ask the administration, okay, you've done some analysis of the cost associated with transportation. Does that impact your thinking on this? Meaning, does that pull off any of the options before us in your view, or can the budget accommodate that without a material impact?
Based on the four options that are currently before the board, no, there's not enough dissimilarity among the various options to pull out one that's any worse off or better off than the others. All of them could be accomplished within the resources that we have
So
moving forward.
even the delta between doing nothing, which I think where we are at a capacity, that's not an option. But if it were, the total amount of new ads you feel like is okay under any of those options.
Yes, we add routes every year because as we continue to grow and add new students and we add new facilities, that is something that's not uncommon to us. So it is something that we could work through.
And one of the other things I think before we get into it, and I don't know you all's thoughts, but as we get into this, I mean, we have a lot of different issues, including grandfathering, and to me, that may be something we look at towards the end once we move through various options and decide what we want to do, and then we can decide how grandfathering fits in. One thing, though I do think it impacts, is the number of students that we're actually moving. And I think we had a little taste of that when we look at the numbers of kids in those spreadsheets and the little insets. Depending on the grandfathering rate, those numbers that look large could be very, very small until, if we do grandfathering, like we previously talked about, we don't see full impact until, is it 2021-22 school year? So keep that in mind because the numbers transferred may be different depending on grandfathering rates. And here, when it's not a wash because it's not really two ways because we have a capacity problem at one school. Keep that in mind. Who wants to go next?
I do have one more busing question, and I may have just missed it. So if we did nothing for some of these rural routes, with the opening of Wellborn Middle School, will we still be adding a high school only route, even if we did zero rezoning? Would we be adding another high school bus route in some of the rural routes, or would we not?
No,
I'm getting a no.
No, we would not be adding.
Okay,
we would still be able to do 5 through 12 on many of those routes.
okay. That's what I need to know. Thank you.
For clarification on that then, if you go back to the option 2B, so on that, on the west side, we are adding. So if we did not do anything, we're still adding one route to the west side then, right? For growth. Okay.
Mr. Silva. The projected added route for the west side is not a high school only route, though.
That is
If we
correct.
didn't, it would be a 512 route.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay.
What do y'all think about a general discussion where we walk through each option and talk about kind of identifying the issues? I know we got a lot of help doing that with emails and the public forum. But I think it might be good to do that, just as an idea. I mean, I'm searching for a way to,
So kind of go
Start.
through positives and negatives,
yep.
pros and cons.
Mm-hmm. Think that's all right?
Yes.
I want to start with option one. All right, let's do that.
I would say one of the major positives of option one is that you don't move those students that are in such close proximity to the current College Station High School, that are zoned to currently at College Station High School. I think that I'm having a hard time with that concept.
Talking about the walking, biking group.
I think that's a positive for option one.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It also allows for quite a bit of growth to Consol. You know, those neighborhoods are not done. I mean, I know that's in the numbers. But
I think probably the biggest summary I have on option one, and I don't have a scientific thing, I didn't go back and count them, but I think it was mind-boggling to me on the number of people that wrote in support of option one didn't even live in the affected areas. And so I think that just mind-boggled me. And as I dove into that some more, I went to brazoscad.org and started typing in some of the addresses, one to see if where those addresses were and to see if we've even rezoned those. And I could not find one of the, and again, I promise you I didn't go through all of them. But I could not find one that has been rezoned in the last 15, 20 years. So I think it's mind-boggling to me the reason there would be some of the people that took the interest, you know, to make the comment saying they support that, which I mean, feedback is good, but as I tried to read them, and again, some of them were just, like last time, they're pretty much, I think they're the same emails with, you know, tweaking words here and there. But at the end, I was really trying to see if I could find out what was motivating factor and whether they're getting moved or not moved. And the ones I looked at, I don't think I found one that was being moved. So I just found that.
Well, I'm not sure I 100% agree with that. I would agree. There were a lot of emails we got from people who had no dog in the hunt that preferred option one for numerous reasons, including lowering or increasing comparable composition. And I mean, you'd have to go back and look through, so don't take me at my word, but I'd say 50% of them, I think, were people that had no dog in the hunt, and the other 50% were all people who live within walking or biking distance. So there were a good number of people who certainly wrote and supported option one that were all in that yellow, what we're calling Midtown quadrant. So I don't want to make it sound like those people certainly didn't.
No, and that's a very good point. What I did is when I went to brazoscad.org,
Right.
that's what I was trying to do and I got a map and started doing little dots and tallies of
Yes.
those, and that's,
So I would agree. So
Yeah.
people who had no dog in the hunt, in other words, their kids weren't moving, if we received an email from them, they were generally in support of option one.
right.
Yeah, no,
That's
I
a
would
good
agree.
summary.
I would agree with that. That's a good way to put it.
But it became apparent that some of the comparable comparisons, I mean, I think that's important to a lot of people in this community. And we, you know, oftentimes we hear that shouldn't matter, and it does to this community. And I do think that whether they change some things or not, I understand sometimes people don't feel comfortable in writing, But I also think that it did show to me that it still is important. Comparability is important as far as the direction we're moving. I don't want to discount that, even though maybe they weren't affected. I'm certainly not suggesting which way I'm leaning, but more about sometimes, you as we go through this and you hear things, it's like, where does the community stand? Because, again, I've been part of this a long time, and it was important very long time ago, and it continues to be important to quite a few people in this community. And some of them still have children while they may not be affected. There were some letters written by people who maybe their child wasn't affected in these maps, but that they still have children in the district too. I don't want it to indicate that it's not people that.
And I think it's good also for people to know that that's why we're probably sitting here today, in large part too,
Yes.
because it's part of the guidelines we're going by.
Right, because it still pertains to this community.
Still on option one. One thing, the middle school split numbers. Last time we talked about that, there was some anxiety over, I'll use the term slivers. Option one does help on that to some extent.
Well, that's a lot of pluses. So the obvious downside is we've got people in the far southern end of our district who are now going to have substantially, well, so I'm be careful about a value judgment, are going to have longer drive times. Certainly, I think we've received information tonight that those that are concerned about that from a bus perspective, it might not be as bad as it could have been if we're going to actually start adding some high school only routes to those areas. But even for kids in high school who are not on the bus, the fact is they will be driving a longer distance to Consol than they would be to College Station High School. So fundamentally, that's the big drawback about option one, at least in my mind. In addition to the fact that obviously there's just, but it's that way. I mean, I think we can look at all of these and just go ahead right now and say all of them make comparable composition better. All of them, and perhaps not perfectly equally, all of them hit some attendance numbers and reduce overcrowding at College Station High School. And so what we're talking about now are things that are on the edge, right? Each one of these were put together by the administration in a way that was designed to hit the major numbers one way or the other. And I think we'll haggle about how well they actually do that long term. That's a different issue. But some of those are straightforward, whether we say them or not for each one, right? So.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And to me, that what we can talk about is the difference, because what it strikes me is there's kind of a trade-off here on some issues. And it's it starts to boil down to a relatively discrete number. And you start then making that analysis and go, well, which way do I want to go? We have to move some students. It's figuring out, well, where are we going to move them from? And to use a good agriculture metaphor, we've already picked the low-hanging fruit. I mean, there are hard choices to make here. I look back at what was done last time, and you see kind of the approach that was taken. Those were difficult decisions even then. Well, these are more difficult because you're dealing with, again, the obvious issues of adding drive time to the people in the southern part of the district, or some of the options have people who can walk to school moving them to a different school and telling them they need to get on a bus or in a car. And that's a hard choice. And if you want, I mean, we can do that. One thing I think it's important for us to talk about is that overall number of students. I have some concerns. Are we moving enough kids? Or are we going to be, under any of these options, right back here again in a couple of years under the FC local, where they come to us and say, do you want to rezone or do you want to go for a bond? Thoughts on that?
So let's remind us again when we would ask for the bond, and then when those kids would be able to move into that new, if the bond is approved, when those kids would be able to start utilizing that space at CSHS.
I'm just going from memory here, but it seemed like all 4 plans, we went to bond at the same year, which I believe was 2021, correct? Or, I'm sorry, I wanted to be lazy and not look it up. Mr. Silva, could you look that up for us?
It's not circled on this one.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I didn't put Mr. Martindale's presentation from last Wednesday in there, but I think he's looking for it right now.
But I think it's
I believe it's
2021.
2021 and 2025.
And yeah, and the third high school, potential third high school was the same
2025, I believe.
in all four options.
So bond in 2021,
For College Station High School Phase 2.
right, for College Station High School Phase 2. Bond in 2021, and then that would be completed 2024?
Fall 2024.
And just as you're looking at that, Ms. Nolan, I've had some folks tell me that, well, one is so much, not number one, but one of these options is so much better than all the others because, you know, the others aren't going to work because of capacity issues, and we're gonna have to go to bond. And well, we're going to bond in all four options at the same time. And in fact, if you look in 2021, the capacity in the driver, and this is obviously CSHS, the capacity at CSHS in 2020, 2021 is exactly what it is right now. So we'll basically be in the same position we are at capacity at CSHS in 2-3 years as we are right now. So I was like, I'm just not seeing that one option over the other as far as capacity goes, if these numbers hold up. Right. Which I think we all have concerns whether they will or not, but this is what we have to go off of.
So I mean, in all of the plans by 2020, we're already over capacity at College Station. But we do have to pay attention to what's going on with these projections at A&M Consolidated, because in option 1, I mean, Consol is at capacity by 2023. Because that's why, that was, when I was looking through this at home, I was like, maybe we need to move more kids to College Station High School. But then I started looking at that number and seeing that, well, A&M Consol is going to be at capacity by 2023 as well. I mean,
So I would say that you kind of have to thread the needle a little bit.
I know.
Especially when you're moving large growth areas
right.
where the growth is a lot of projection. Where's that? Is that growth going to be primarily at College Station High School or primarily at Consol? Are you splitting those growth areas to try to account for that? Thank you, Mr. Martindale.
How long is it to build a new high school? I hate to ask that question. Is it the same 3 years it would be for?
So I would, was John here? It was 3 years last time, but last time we went to bond in May. And so I don't even want to answer. I want to ask Mr. Hall
Gotcha.
on
But
that.
it's ballpark 3 years. I mean, it might
3
be
years.
plus or minus a year.
Might be just a hair more, just depends because now we're going in November instead of May.
Can I ask another generic question that's related to that? So the other day, if I understood you correctly, it's $40 million estimated if we do expansion to College Station High School, and that would be for 600 kids?
So as it's contemplated right now, Mr. Schaefer, we're thinking 35 to 40 in today's dollars. And it would be classroom space for an additional 600 students, a third gymnasium, and a black box theater. Now, all that would be subject to Plan for Growth Committee, a board, and, as to what we would actually do going forward. But that's our best thinking right now because that was what we had talked about when we built phase 1 of College Station High School.
Okay, and College Station High School cost roughly what?
I think the guaranteed maximum price for it back then was 89 or 91 or somewhere in that area. Total project budget was like 111. That's everything, technology, all of it.
Not that we have money, but when you start averaging that out per kid, that becomes, in my mind, that becomes a no-brainer. Not that we're going to ask somebody for $100 million. So, but if you ask for like $100 million and that's for 2,000 kids for a long time, I mean, it's just something to think about with Dr. Wesson's.
I mean, versus 40 for 600.
Oh, okay.
So just adding another third high school and skipping the extra base.
Which I imagine that has people puking right now, but I mean, it is a number.
No, I mean,
That's a number I've been looking at.
So I think it's one of the keys to think about moving forward is our projections are, we've had 2 different demographers give us projections as to how big we'll be at build out, and both of them gave us roughly 25,000 students. So we're not going to be Sci-Fair and have 110,000. We'll be probably somewhere around 25. That's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000 high school kids. So we're not a little bit farther than halfway there right now, and that translates into 3 6A high schools. Probably if you divide 7,000 by 3, that's 3 6A high schools. Not mega high schools, but fairly full 6As. And so would want to make sure that as we go through this process that we think about not only now but what it would look like farther down the road. And if we capped one school at only 2,000 students and we had 2 other schools that were much bigger, is that going to give us the ultimate capacity that we're going to need down the road when construction costs will be obviously much bigger?
And much bigger, and I can't believe I'm even thinking about this either. But if we capped once, just say capped CSHS at 2,000, that leaves us, again, projections, 5,000 other students. So, 2,500 students at 2 other schools, which is not, it's not significantly more.
How would you like to draw those boundary adjustments?
I bet we'll have term limits by then and I'll be long gone.
Or self-inflicted.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what I said earlier is a moot point because every single one of them is at capacity at 2023. So, according to these projections.
If our estimates in the past have erred,
Right.
in which direction has that been?
Who are you asking?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just
I was like thinking I have an answer, but like,
do you want an official answer?
No,
Yeah, what
I
do
mean,
you
we all know the answer.
who are you looking for?
I'm just searching for the best way for us as a group to move forward, and
I think over the years that it has been the unknown projection, like the ones that you anticipate thinking that it's going to happen in either direction. Because I was talking to a long-term resident today, and, I got the sorry, typical. And, you know, I looked at her and I said, all those years ago, would we have thought that we would be sitting here, you know, talking about a third high school? We barely thought about a second high school, although they did because they had land for it. But the third high school was not even in the picture. So for us to be sitting here and talking about that, but as we have grown, first of all, we didn't have any idea we were going to grow to the point that we've grown. I would say that growth has been, I know to some people who've just moved here, well, it's like a no-brainer, but it really, to those of us that have lived here a long time, this seems almost unimaginable to see the growth that we're seeing, because I certainly would have been a lot smarter in buying a whole lot more land in this town if I had known what I know now. That's number one. Number two, I think sometimes like we in the district have to rely on what we think is going to happen, and some of those things happen and some of them don't. And so, you know, right now we're dealing with some real numbers for the first time, I think, going into this than we have in the past, because we've always been opening a new school with having capacities and hoping for the best. For the first time, I think this board is faced with the fact that we are under capacity. We also have a comparability situation here, and so we're wrestling with something a little bit different than we have in the past. And then how do you move forward from that? Because I look at this and option one of the things I think about with option one is those are known growth areas, which probably doesn't include one way or the other we have known growth in this and we have unknown growth in his. So there's a lot of growth in here that is unknown and known. And, you know, which direction do you go? Like, I spend a lot of time thinking about this, unlike some email and some comments that we get that I don't care. I lose a lot of sleep over this personally, and I do care about the kids, and I don't want to have to move them, and I don't want to do these things, but the reality is that we are faced with a situation where we have to. And then when you look at option one, we sure are including, as a negative, we are including not both the unknown and the known growth areas in a large area. And that scares me personally from the standpoint of we're not giving ourselves any wiggle room, so we're not here again, or you're not here again in the near future. Just like
Who are you looking at?
for real fun. So I think that, you know what, I think that's what makes this difficult as we look through this. And I don't know, you know, I've thought about one of the discussion points would be, you know, how much do we put percentage-wise on what known growth area we know is growing, and a percentage on what could grow. That maybe we've talked about that, yeah, that sounds good. Are there streets? I mean, is there sewage system in this area? You know, those kinds of things. Where are we in the development of some of these growth areas that we're talking about? So, for instance, and I'm trying to pick something else, but
Pick this one.
okay, I'll pick that one. Okay, that's a good one to pick. Mission Ranch. You know what? Just my question a while ago. Do they have streets? Where are they in that particular area in putting actual houses on the ground? Because what I don't want to do again is say, we think that's going to go, and it doesn't go, because we put a lot of stock in a couple of these places that just simply didn't go. And I think that lands us here. And I think people, that's what our demographers are telling us. That's what the professionals are telling us. And then where do we find that balance of what the demographers tell us and what we're actually seeing? And I think that it's important for us to not make the same mistake and look at those things again. Because if we don't, we're going to be here again. Because I have gotten to where I know that the demographers are good, but I also know that I know what I see and I'm driving around. And we are smart here in knowing what's going on in this community. And while we need to rely on the demographers, I also think we need to rely on what we actually see. That's my 2 cents.
Since I wasn't on the board, what areas were, somebody just like me on the ones that the demographers were, do I expect them to get right on? No, but which ones in specific?
I would say probably the two biggest ones would be Southern Point and Mission Ranch. Southern Point has been obviously contemplated. That's the racetrack for those who are unaware. That has been contemplated in the last couple rezonings because it's been something that's been on the horizon for a little bit of time.
We've had numbers in there for,
In previous iterations, yes, of demographic reports, based on the information we get from the city, or that our demographers get, excuse me, from the city, from the county, from the developers. So those numbers have been included before.
Thing, right? We've got to remember those demographers, they go talk to these developers and they say, well, how many houses do you expect to have? And developers have a tendency to be optimistic with the numbers that they list. And it's in their favor to be optimistic about it, I think, whether the numbers hit or not. And so it's one of the reasons of frustration, I think, as I get to this, and I know we heard this in the comments on, how long ago was that? 2 days ago, and we've it all gets mixed up, and also the emails that we've gotten from various groups that, I guess it's frustrating to me to hear people say, well, let's just put this off and let's just hold it off and not do anything. Let's just see how it shakes out over the next couple of years, which is exactly what we heard 2 years ago, right? I think at least 80% of the people who spoke the other night want continuity, right? That's what we all want. None of us want to be here. I don't think any of us pictured after 2016, the rezoning, the fact that we would be sitting here again 2 years later. Literally, I was like, we have solved our problem and pushed it off for 5 years. And when we did that, I think we did it with the hope that growth would happen in some areas and it wouldn't happen in other areas. And what did we find? We all know the old saying about hope is it didn't turn out the way we wanted it to, right? And the numbers ended up being substantially worse than what we even thought the worst projections were going to be from a growth perspective in the College Station High School area. And I think if continuity is at the end of the day the real push, and that people, because we all agree that this has a tendency to tear our communities apart every time we go through this, that if we want to guarantee that we're not doing this 2 years from now, we cannot rely on hope of how places are going to grow. And unfortunately, I think what that means is you have to move actual bodies that are there, and do your best to zone growth in both areas. But to the degree that we sit around moving a fewer number of students and hoping that this one area will take off is going to mean that we're back here in 2 years. And I don't think that's fair to our community. I don't think it's certainly not fair to my health. So in my book, I think that we've got to do enough in this round, and I don't 100% sure that any of these four are enough to guarantee that we're not going to be sitting in this spot, that we're not rezoning again until 2025 when we have a third high school. I think that was our hope in 2016. We had a committee of people, and that committee of people was unwilling to move a lot of folks. And it didn't have anything to do with the two options that got argued about, I guess, or at the end of the day, towards the end of that. Because the truth is, had we gone either way on that decision, we'd still be back sitting in this spot. We weren't talking about enough people to make the difference to where maybe we're doing it next year instead of this year, but at the end of the day, we're still doing it. So I just, I want to take into account these growth things. I pulled out and went back through the demographic study and looked at neighborhoods and all this stuff. And I know all of that's worked into these numbers, but I just think our ability to sit down and project where that growth is going to go exactly is a fool's errand in some respects. I mean, the demographers have to do what they can do, and maybe if every single developer overstates what they're actually going to end up doing, it works itself out. But I've been through 3 of these things now, one on a committee and then one sitting on the board, and never has it worked out the exact same way that undeveloped growth places have never worked out the way we thought. Communities that have already started growing continue to grow.
But Dr. Weston, I think one of the things that goes with that is things that we cannot control.
Right.
So we've had, those areas that we've had growth that has growth, but we also have areas that makes this worse, is areas that don't have growth, that are actually losing students.
Yep.
And I think that's something just as important as the growth.
No,
Well, and I was going to say, some of it, like, even in the
Windsor Ridge
case of,
Apartments, how did we?
Yeah.
right. Well, I was going to say, even in 2010, right, 2010, I lose count. We had redevelopment after that happened that really affected our numbers that no one saw coming. Demographers, district, I don't even know that the city, saw that. And it affected, our comparability numbers greatly. And I don't think people understand that, some of those things are way out of anyone's control. The districts, the cities, people do what they're going to do based on, where they're going to invest. And sometimes it's not just developers, it's people who come in and redevelop, some things, areas that go on. So I think I love your comments about, what we have to, I think we first have to look at what we do know. And then we balance out what we think we know, or what we might know, or what we hope to know, even in that case. But if we work with what we do know first, and I don't know if that can be an exact science by any stretch, but I think we have to start there, and then we can look at some of these, okay, so where, as we kind of push and pull on it, as you say, then maybe that's how, and I'm certain that you all have done some of that with the demographers, and maybe as we come and have some questions about that, you could answer. I don't want to assume that you haven't looked at that and that we can't just ask those questions and, hey, what does this look like? Or is that something that would be
The
amendable?
question, I don't know what if we'd be fully able to answer at this time, but if you would like us to go research something and bring it back for next
That's
Monday.
more what I was looking
Yeah,
for.
we'd certainly relish the opportunity to be able to do that.
Well, I just want to say real quick that I appreciate the chart on the growth areas and what Templeton was basing their projections on, because I think a lot of us are just, we have no idea. And I know some of the things we've been sent, and I've been talked to quite a bit in the last 48 hours about this, is that the reason evidently rezoning failed 2 years ago is completely the Speedway's fault. And I mean, I don't think anyone in that, right, is any committee members here from, there's Abby, hey.
Well, Geraldine.
And Gerald and Miss Nolan,
Put it all on her.
I'm pretty sure no one in that room thought there was going to be one house built in 2018 out there. So it's, that's not what y'all or we were thinking. But I kind of, put this along with, Miss Barrett, you just kind of, what's your gut telling you living here, driving around, seeing what's happening. Some of this I see, some of this I think is probably a pipe dream.
I did a lot of driving around the last 2 days. A lot. I discovered parts of this town that I didn't know were here. I went out to Peach Creek Crossing.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. And I saw places where there could be lots of growth, but it's not happening yet, at least not from what I could see, but there's a lot of potential out there. But again, that's part of if it's not, my gut is that if it's not already happening, and like you said, once the development starts, people do move in. But if it's not even started and not even taking off yet, we can't bank on that. So
Okay, on option one, I'll just, would you get back to that real quick?
Sure, before you do that, let me remind the group that in 33 minutes, we will have hit our 2-hour mark, and
Holy moly.
yeah, time flies. So
We're on-
keep in mind that we have 33 minutes.
Gotcha. Or is that drop dead?
Well, it has to be today.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I'm all about track meets, so
That's exactly right.
um,
And soccer games.
I'm appropriately dressed for it. Um, for me, with option one, and when these were shared last week, let's just put it out there. There's a lot to hate about all four of them. Can I say that? There's just major problems with all of them, but the thing is, it's as Mr. Harris said, it's difficult. I believe Dr. Weston mentioned it. I am not a big fan of the southernmost parts of the entire school district just about being transported. The numbers, and when I say numbers, I can already hear it now. I'm getting accused of, I'm just focusing on numbers. I realize that these numbers represent kids and families. I think we all understand that. I don't care what a spreadsheet looks like. I really don't.
I like spreadsheets.
I don't either. Excel, get out of here. So anyway, but again, the numbers on all four plans work. What bothers me, and I've actually had more people call me in the last 24 hours to discuss this, and these are people who are not affected at all. I mean, there may be some agenda or whatever. However, they don't like the idea, and I don't either. I'm not going to just put this on them. When we look at the blue in option one, we're looking at Nantucket and Indian Lakes and Saddle Creek, and these folks are all going to Consol, joining Pebble Creek and Williams Creek and Foxfire, and basically the kind of the upper echelon, I guess, of subdivisions in town. And these people are saying, well, I really like option one. It helps us have a good blend of students at every school, and I'm not seeing that. As someone whose kids has gone to College Station High School, they're subjected, not all the time, but we hear, well, it's the rich school, it's the rich school, it's the rich school. And while the SES numbers might be out of whack, well, no, they are. Let's just put that out there. They are out of whack. I mean, what the term super school is getting thrown out. And while I don't know if I agree with that, however, I do think there would be a pretty big imbalance. And that is something that I'm struggling with, and I know a lot of people are struggling with. I don't know if y'all.
Let's be clear. And I just want to.
Okay, well, yeah, and it's not something I'm comfortable talking about at all.
It's just a term you use, and I just want to make sure it doesn't come back. But as we know, that has a tendency to happen. So I'm trying.
It'd be
I'm trying
several
to look
terms
out
I
for
just
it, right?
used.
So the notion of upper echelon, we're talking about higher property value.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Homes.
Yes.
So we're not. There's not a judgment call on that.
No, not at all. Not at all. Thank you.
You're right.
Thank you. Look forward to
I had the fortitude to say that. So
the foot.
That's a big step. Thanks.
It is.
Pick a word.
So,
I think those would be the planning areas, Dr. Ely,
Granulating it,
because each one of those is a planning.
the granularity.
Yes.
and when it was first shared, you were giving us the numbers of students who were changing schools, and the number traumatized me. However, the other three had similar numbers. I mean, one was a little bit less, but there was just no getting around that.
Well, I mean, you've got to move a substantial number of people in order to
absolutely.
not be at capacity, and
Right, and right back here again in 2 years.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
thank you for breaking the ice for us.
Well,
No, somebody has to do it, and I think that's a fantastic point. I mean, I can tell you, I look at option one, and that is kind of the only issue with option one that gives me some heartache. I mean, I see that, and perception matters.
Sure.
We've been dealing with that, and we know it. It's not always something that we like to talk about, but it absolutely matters, and the perception there, I think it is what it is. Whether it is actually well-founded, I mean, I don't know. I don't know the details of the remaining neighborhoods in that green area, but I do think I know enough to suspect there probably is some truth to that. So, I mean, to me, that is a limitation on option one, and something that I would like to address. If that is the general direction we're going, I would like to try to address that in some way. So, thank you. I think
Be here all day.
Mr. Williams raised another point that I think is probably good to get out. I can tell you one of the biggest things that gives me heartburn is putting people who can walk to school or ride their bike on a bus. I mean, I know it does all of you too. But when you look at some of those options, that's incredibly difficult for me to come to grips with.
Yeah, I like Geraldine, I drove a bunch of this stuff. I mean, to me, option 2A, as it sits, is a non-tenable option, just because we're moving some kids at the side of that rectangle that on a good windy day could spit on College Station High School from their house. I mean, they're just literally right there. So, you know, and I think obviously option 2B and option 3 changes that to where that line's a little bit farther away. But still, and I think we heard from a lot of those people, and we heard a lot from a lot of them in emails as well,
But there are still cut-throughs.
they're very close. I mean, the notion that they can walk down Barron Road and be at their high school.
Well, and that's what I did discover by driving around. And yes, I'm that creepy person that was driving around at school times, so I could see what was actually going. I had to see it with my own eyes. I did. And I saw a bunch of kids walking. There's like cut-throughs through those neighborhoods, y'all. They're not walking down Barron Road. They're walking through these cut-throughs and stuff. And
Shepherd's Path.
yeah, so they are.
No, they are.
So that really upsets me to move those kids that can walk. And somebody, I wrote it down, somebody the other night said that they moved in those neighborhoods so they could have so that their kids would have built-in independence. And that set with me because it's true, you know, being able to help themselves.
Well, and there was an email where a parent moved there who couldn't drive. I mean, that got to me too, that particular email. You know, Dr. Harris, I was going to call you, sorry.
Appreciate that.
I know.
Juris Doctor.
I've been called worse.
Jurisprudence. I think, like, one of the things that I think we could probably agree on today, perhaps in moving forward, is that we all struggle with that walking, biking. Is that something that is all like, we don't have to take it off the table, but at least we all agree on that's a negative.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think we look at these and, you know, option 1 is we save all the walkability.
Right.
And option 3 is we remove the long rides for the people that are in some of the most southern areas. Because if we say all the people in the southern areas, we're going to get crushed because everybody on the east side of Highway 6 is just going to say the reality is we're the farthest away from anything. So from the areas that we're potentially rezoning, those southern areas, it keeps them from having to drive a longer distance, but it has a huge number of people that are probably the closest to College Station High School in the meantime. And both the two options are kind of mixtures of 1 and 3. That's just the reality of it, right? So let's take some from each one of those.
Well, that's what I was going to say. When we start talking about this, I think that the community needs to understand, and I assume that the district is expecting us to push and pull on these, and that we're not bound to one of these 4 options. We can start to
Tweak it.
tweak them.
with
And
women
I think that that's important for everyone to know, because, as soon as you say, well, we don't want them to have to walk, well, then that all makes everybody assume, in some cases, not everyone, because I don't like that, but a lot of people, they would assume, well, then you're going towards option 1, and that's not necessarily the truth of it. So I want to make that clear, whoever can see or hear, that just because we're saying that gives us angst does not mean that we automatically look and say option 1 is the answer, because that's not what I'm thinking either. So,
If everything gives us angst, then we can't rezone at all.
right.
All of these are,
Right.
as Mr. Dujan
Or we live
pointed
with
out, they're
angst.
all right. They're bad. They're all
Would-
bad options in that there are people that move that don't want to.
But there's other places that, like, I mean, I'm just gonna put it out there, there's some other places where you can't walk that that is necessarily, that has a high density, but you can't walk there because of a street that you can't, right? And so you could begin to look at some of those things too, or you may have already looked at those things, and we can start to ask about that. So,
I think we had 3 emails that said, "Why is Castlegate not on the list?"
I think that
for
there were,
potential moves,
exactly.
right? And they're not in any of these options, right? Both
Well, and
with
they're not,
Castlegate
and they're not, and they can't, they could walk, but it would be
against across a major thoroughfare.
correct.
With some of the angst that we have on 1 and 2A, would administration see, now that we've kind of brought some of the issues that we have there, would y'all like to come up with different options on like 2B or 3, or is that being that you're seeing more, some of the issues that,
So as I'm listening to the conversation that's been occurring for the last 45 minutes or so, there's been a lot that's been thrown out, but a couple of things I think that have resonated with me is, one, is a general nod to the fact that the projections that have been made in the past have, for whatever reasons, undershot the numbers at A&M Consolidated, undershot the projections. The reality has been less than the projections. At College Station High School, the reality has been more than the projections. And we can sit here and talk about the reasons for that, but that's as maybe Mrs. Barrett said it, as we drive around, we put our eyes on it, that's some of the things we know living here. So as I've been reflecting on these options that we have here, perhaps it would be good for us to come back and, with an acknowledgement of that, perhaps look at other options that increase the overall number of kids that would be moving to Consol, based on the conversation that I'm hearing and the nods that I'm seeing around the table. And with that, I think there's perhaps other variations of some of these options that we have, 1, 2A, 2B, and 3, that perhaps we could maybe combine together, look at some other things as well, that we could bring another option or 2 back to you. I guess what I'm hoping to hear from the board is there something that you're thinking about? Is there, option 3, have you thought about moving this line, or option 1 or 2A or whatever? If there is something that you would like to instruct us to go back and bring back here, and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, maybe it'll make it worse, I don't know. But I don't know if you're prepared for that yet. And if you're not, that's fine. We've got a number of these meetings set up.
I don't know how hard it is. Just draw a line.
Just one line?
Just one line. One horizontal line in between, and show people what it would be like if we just drew a pure north-south line, and how wacky those numbers would be.
An east-west line that divides the district north and south. Is that what you mean?
Yes, ballpark. Yeah.
Roughly.
I mean, yeah.
we can certainly do that.
Well, so many people constantly talk about that, and they constantly, why don't you just do this? And I think it would be beneficial, just if nothing else, just to put it out there and say, this is what we would look like if we did that. And I already know what the answer to that is, which is a non-tenable situation from my perspective, but you hear that so often from people that it's, and the other one is just send everybody to the closest school. But the reality is we learn really quickly that based on population density, you cannot do that. You just can't do it. So, I think that would be worth seeing. It might also be worthwhile, and I want to say we have some of these numbers in our demographic numbers, and that way we're not freaking people out by putting some numbers on subdivisions that are potential that we have not talked about yet. So what is a number of kids in Castlegate 2? And I'm no way saying that these are people that I think we should move, okay? But that way we have a number on kind of all of those different areas. Creek Meadows over there on the other side, that area that's east of Welborn, that's kind of in that upper yellow strip. Now the truth is, I think that upper yellow strip is there mainly to help us balance out SES. It'd be good to know how many kids we're actually talking about in those regions. And that way we just kind of have a ballpark that if we want to start playing with numbers and adding here or there to any of the options, that we would at least have a ballpark idea of what those numbers would be before we started poking the bear. To me, that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense to y'all, then
I think
No,
it
it
makes
does.
a lot of
I think that
sense.
makes sense, but I think also with the input that you're giving, I'm all for a couple more options too. Just for time's sake.
Yeah.
That you bring back.
I just, I'm hesitant to remove any of the options that we have on the table at the moment, because I don't think we haven't wrestled with what is, I think, the real issue, and we're not going to have time to do that tonight, which is fundamentally, and I'm still struggling with this. So, but do we care more about protecting walkability and being close versus adding 5 to 6 minutes to a drive? And it might be longer than that. I don't know what the exact number is, and I realize it's time of day kind of stuff.
Are we a little defensive?
I just, you want to head off issues, since we're now doing this in the public instead of having another committee do it behind closed doors where they can be honest with questions without having it made a big deal. So preserving walkability versus adding 6 or 7 minutes to a ride time on the bus or a car when those people are already in a bus or a car. And I think we heard that comment the other day, and I don't know what the right answer to that is. But sooner or later, we're going to have to come down on which of those two things we think is more important, and because that's going to make a decision on a lot of this. Or we're willing to say we're going to do it to some people and not to others, and call it halfway in between. And but that's at the end of the day. It's fundamentally, what do you think is the most important out of those two things? And I mean, I think we're just, as a board, we're going to have that conversation. That's the only way we're going to solve this problem. So, but to me, you guys have provided a lot of information on exactly how many people we're talking about in each one of these areas. And now being able to go back and look at totals and where totals are going to be, using the information that you guys presented last time, there's a lot more information to chew on and think about, I think, before our next meeting. But I mean, I've already said everything I need to say, so.
So I've got, I'm going to list two things. One is an east-west line to divide the district north and south, basically, for the high school students, and see what those numbers would look like, a scenario, what that looks like.
Just where things would have to fall to make things play out.
And overall numbers of other areas that we have not talked about, including Castlegate and Castlegate 2, Creek Meadows.
Whatever other little subdivisions in there that we have not moved from yellow to blue.
From College Station to Consol.
College Station to Consol.
I just want to thank y'all again for the growth area numbers. Super helpful.
Sure.
Super
Yeah.
helpful.
I agree wholeheartedly.
I mean, just personally looking at Margraves, because you wonder. But I mean, just looking at these numbers, knowing that the year we would be going to bond, they were only counting on 15 kids anyway. But that 4 years away, I can maybe buy that.
Is there anything else other members of the board would like for us to bring back for next time?
Yes, I have a few things, and I want to echo his point. I think maybe next time it would be good for everyone to be prepared to have a discussion about relative merits of walkability, bikeability, and then extending drive times. Because that is the reality. That is a crux of part of this trade-off here. There are a couple of things I want to see, and it's the first one. It's if you can probably tell me the answer without actually having to do it and show us. It's what would these options look like if we did not move the Anderson Street group?
I can't give you the exact numbers, but the comparability numbers would be not very dissimilar from our current comparability numbers, and they're roughly about 35% low SES at Consol, roughly 21% at College Station High School. Not making that move of multifamily housing from the Consol zone to the College Station zone perpetuated basically the same comparability or disparity numbers, if you will, that we currently have in almost every scenario.
So it keeps it double-digit difference.
Yes.
Okay.
Do we have access to, or do we know whenever we rezone if people move, if renters? Do we have any idea? Because I mean, the easiest people that can move would be people that rent, right?
I guess I don't understand your question.
I don't think I understand my question. I'm sorry. It's in my head. I just can't figure out how to ask it. Just because.
You see, most of the multifamily housing apartments are all on the north side of town. I mean, the ones that are being built in the south right now are not gearing themselves towards students, and probably, I don't want to say not for, I don't know how they're going to market their places, but it's not going to be more for families. It's going to be more professional oriented.
I'm just thinking if you only have a 1-year lease, and then
Yeah, you can always move, and that's, but that's part of, right, option 3, when you decide to go down the highway on the west-hand side, that big old chunk, part of that, especially down once you start hitting Tower Point, are apartments and townhomes and things like that are probably unlikely to have a lot of kids in them regardless, is my guess. You'll have some, well, you have some in every development, but
I'm reaching here, but I know with the committee last time, when Templeton would show up and each group would take their proposal to them and they would plug it in and they could draw the lines. Is there any way we could get a computer, or you're not liking that at all, are you, Mr.
play
Martindale?
with live numbers, do it live.
We don't exactly have and we didn't do it live in front of everybody either. They went to another room and
That's
worked
true,
on
that's
some
true.
things. And there's ripple effects. If you move just one neighborhood or just one area, then it throws the capacity numbers up or too low in one area, or it throws off the comparability numbers. And so then you take less than that, or then you move another area. And so there's a lot. There is, to do that in a public setting like this so quickly, could get really confusing
Okay.
for the board and really confusing for the community. And so I think probably the best thing is for you guys to give us some direction. It takes a little
Okay.
bit longer. It's how we've done it in the past though, but if you give us some direction, we'll try some things. Okay, that didn't work, but we tried this and bring them back to you. And then kind of continue that process until perhaps we find another option that would be better, more tenable for everybody, or one of the 4 options that we have before us.
Fair enough.
Okay, I have a couple more in it. And again, I don't want the fact that I'm asking it to make people think that I want to do it. I'm trying to get an idea for the impact of the relative pieces. So as we're starting to get the pieces put together, we can kind of see how it works. If you could, for option 2B, add the blue section that you've added there. It's basically the Arrington Road group from 2A. So Nantucket, Indian Lakes down there.
So you're saying option 2B plus Indian Lakes, Nantucket, that whole triangle.
Yeah, or if you want to say it differently, it looks like it's the same thing as to option 1, adding the corner in the middle section.
Is that Bridal Gate?
I don't.
I get what you're saying. It's a small area, midtown, taken
Added
away.
to option 1,
Okay, I think I
That's
understand
it.
what you're saying.
or big southern area added to option 2B.
Okay.
And then the other one to look at was adding Margraves to option 1. But, and again, if these are difficult, I mean, the projections you gave us help a lot with that because that gives them some idea of scope.
We have plenty of time. I mean, 5 days. I mean, this.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say the other one would be, it would give us the answer for adding this piece to everybody, but if you want to put it in terms, for 2B, adding those southern neighborhoods that basically have to get on Welborn to head up anyways. Realize my microphone is not on, but
So are you saying east of Welborn Road,
east of
2154?
Welborn
You're-
Road, but people who in general have to get on Welborn Road
Like
in
Ben
order
Haven,
to go
Sendera,
north.
those folks is
Right.
what you're talking about?
Yeah. And how many folks that would be? Because if the fundamental idea is you're going to have to head up Welborn anyways, and going to Consol is basically another 3 miles up Welborn. I mean, I don't necessarily think it's fair to say you have to live east of Welborn for that to be, I mean, west of Welborn for that to happen. The people that are east of Welborn are also traveling up Welborn. It's the exact same group, right? From a travel time perspective, it'd be interesting to see how many folks that is.
What's the divisions? Are you talking about all the way up to like Creek Meadows?
And what is that?
Or Creek Meadows and south of that.
We can get that.
Yeah,
I would, I've said a couple subdivisions. I'm pretty sure Bentwood's one of them, but I don't want to say Tuscany if it's not one, or Sendera, but it's
Okay.
those folks over there.
Yeah, whatever all those are.
Those people who basically dump out onto Welborn Road is what you're talking
That's
about.
right, yeah.
Okay. Understood.
So are we just getting numbers, or are we plugging it in to see what it would do to?
Like on those last ones, we're plugging it in to see what would happen.
When you, yeah, I mean, I think we'll get the 3 sheets, yeah?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And I mean, we've said it, we've asked for the numbers, and like everyone else, I'm hesitant to suggest a neighborhood because I'm afraid they think that, but I'm interested to see about Creek Meadows and Creek Meadows Estates. Because they're densely populated, they already ride a bus,
Yeah, he's got that.
okay? But I'd like to see that plugged in, but you'd have to take some others away, I would imagine.
You mean,
So you want us to try an option
Try an
that
option.
moves, okay.
would you want him to
I think
try?
That's pretty close to Dr. Wesson's is probably.
You're right.
I hate to say the word sliver because it gets us in trouble.
Yeah, slivers are not good. But in general, people who are going to have to dump out onto Welborn.
Right.
Okay, so for Dr.
I
Wesson's,
want to say for, I'm sure the Creek Meadows people would argue that they can just go up Victoria the whole way to College Station High School.
No, and I did that too.
And I don't know how they would all normally go to school, but so maybe just a number broadly for Creek Meadows, but then everybody else who has to go on to Welborn, if you know what I mean.
We can try those two different ways.
Yep. That'd be great. Did you have another one, Jeff?
I've got one more. I think it would be very easy if you do what Dr. Wesson just asked, but to maybe take out that corner of Walker's in Midtown in 2B.
Yeah, I hear what you're just basically trying to find a group that's already getting on a bus to replace
Midtown, right. So in other
Midtown.
words, 2B, add the people in the south that are going up Welborn automatically and remove Midtown.
And we can do one with Midtown and one without. Just
Yep.
see.
Either way, can't hurt.
Okay.
I know we're making it messy, in some ways a lot messier, but I think by seeing all these things, it's going to give us a better take on when we start asking these what-if questions, we know what the what-ifs are going to turn into before we do this. And I think it's important, right, for people who have not been on one of these committees before, who are watching the sausage get made here. This is just a normal process that they go through, you know, that you'd have 40 people that would split up into 8 different groups, and each one of those 8 groups would be charged with come up with a new plan. And it was just part of the process of doing this, but in that process, you would actually see how all those numbers came out, and you'd have a really good idea of how, when you move this, it was going to affect other things. And so please don't, you know, from outside the system, recognize that we're making the sausage and we're just looking at options without any judgment calls on any of these options at all. So
I think that's a good point. Thank you.
I think the only other thing that I would like to ask is if there's something else that you all see that, you know, something out of all of this, like you're doing it and you go, you have an aha moment or maybe we need to look at this. I would hope that you would feel the freedom as an administration just to bring forward something. I know we're asking for this, but you know, if we just did this more, it would be okay. I want that to be part of this making the sausages to see something that you all see as well.
Absolutely. Just because, using Dr. Wesson's example, taking 2B, adding Bitwood, Sendera, all them, and minus the CSHS Walkers, that was basically what you were talking about. If we saw that it didn't work, but if we moved another area this way, we would certainly do that and bring that to you. So, cool.
Yeah, I think it's important to not leave you out of this process. You know, as far as, you know, just seeing something different, or if there was something that absolutely, I mean, I'm not afraid to look at some of the things that absolutely didn't work. You know, that you felt like, okay, we have this already and we'd like to show you that this absolutely didn't work. I'm not afraid to look at that either. So.
absolutely not.
That is a part of the process.
Right. I actually want to see that. I want to see those. And I want everyone else to be able to see those to say, you know, to show that we are trying different things.
We are at 5 o'clock.
No more homework? Okay.
Not on that issue. Try to go educate kids now. When are we, Monday?
Yes, we're Monday.
At 5 o'clock,
It's posted.
posted Monday, 5 o'clock here.
Monday, 5 o'clock in the board.
Yes, 5 o'clock on Monday.
And
Right back here.
On Monday, bring your calendars.
Yes, because I think it'd be important for us. I know we've got Monday, and then we've got the regular board meeting, board workshop on the 17th, so the Tuesday after that. And we don't have any other date. We may have one other date on the schedule after that. I have to check. But we may need to go ahead and start looking at some dates that might work for all of us, or as many as we can get to keep moving forward.
Are we all here on Monday?
We are.
Okay. There is a possibility I will not be here.
All right.
Well, and with that, one thing I would say, I don't think we would ever want to take action without all 7 members here. But as we're trying to schedule, and I mean, we have to do something. So if somebody can't be there, I think we may at times have to go ahead and proceed. But we would then want to fully brief whoever couldn't be here. But certainly, well, I wouldn't do it, take action without any, or with someone not here. But just keep that in mind. So hopefully we'll all be available and we won't have that, but just in case, I do think we need to move along in the process. Okay, with that, we are adjourned.